My name is Jolene Sims, and at 36, I discovered something I was never meant to see. My own family had quietly put a price on my life, and I had been paying it without even knowing. The night everything cracked open, I had just lost the biggest contract of my career. One phone call wiped out a quarter of my yearly income. I remember sitting in my office by the coast, staring at the numbers on my screen, trying to feel panic, but it never came. I'd rebuilt worse than this before. I told myself I could rebuild again. What I didn't know was that while I was dealing with my collapse, my family was already busy deciding how to use it. When I arrived back at my childhood home that evening, I could feel it immediately. Something was off. Extra cars in the driveway, too many shoes by the door, too many voices inside. Like a meeting had already finished before I even walked in. And I was the topic. The moment I stepped into the living room, my sister didn't even say hello. "So it's true," she said. "You got fired." My mother didn't correct her. She didn't ask if I was okay either. She just watched me like she was waiting for confirmation of a problem she already planned around. I corrected them. I told them the truth. That my client's investor pulled out. A contract collapsed. That's business, not dismissal. But nobody cared about details. They cared about impact. My sister leaned forward first, like she had been holding it in all day. "So who's going to pay my car now?" That was the first real question anyone asked me. Not what happened to me, not if I was okay, just who replaces my money. My mother finally spoke, calm like she was settling a routine issue. "Don't worry, we'll sort it out." We, not I, not you. We, as if my income belonged to the household by default. I felt it then, the strange realization that I wasn't a person in that room. I was a resource, and resources get reassigned. Before I could even process it, my father walked in holding a cardboard box. He didn't look at me. He just opened it like he had already decided what came next. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Your sister needs your room more than you do." Just like that. No discussion, no warning, no question. Like I was furniture being relocated. I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe the speed of it, the certainty. They hadn't even waited for me to sit down before they started dividing my life. My mother added softly, like she was comforting me. "You always land on your feet, Jolene." That line. Always that line. As if my resilience was permission for them to keep taking. My father had already started packing my things, shirts, books, pieces of a life I had built under that roof while silently supporting it from the outside for years. And then I saw something on the shelf that stopped me cold. My grandmother's old sewing tin. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger yet. Clarity. Because in my pocket, I felt something they didn't know existed. A key to a life I had built in silence, far from their assumptions. They thought I was being removed from the house. What they didn't realize was, I had already built another one. I looked at the box, then at my family, and for the first time I understood something very clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a system, and I was done being its foundation. I picked up the box myself, and I walked out. Not because they asked me to leave, but because I finally decided I wouldn't stay where I was, only valued when I was useful. I didn't wait for a discussion after that. There was nothing left in that room worth negotiating. I drove back to the coast that night with the box rattling in the passenger seat like a reminder of how easily people can reduce a life to storage. 3 hours of road, darkness pressing against the windshield, and my thoughts kept doing the same quiet calculation. How long had this been building without me noticing? Not the layoff. That part didn't matter. What mattered was how quickly they moved to reorganize my absence, like I had always been temporary in my own family. By the time I reached the coast, the air had changed. Salt instead of dust. Open space instead of closed rooms. And something in my chest finally loosened. I wasn't going back. Not emotionally, not financially. Not in any way that required me to keep holding a structure that only stood because I was silently bracing it. My office sat above a small waterfront strip, lights still on when I arrived. My business partner, Renata Vance, looked up the moment I walked in. She didn't ask questions first. She never did. She just looked at the box and said, "They finally pushed you out?" I almost corrected her, almost said I left, but the truth was simpler. "They made the decision," I replied. Renata leaned back in her chair, studying me the way she always did when something irreversible had shifted. And? That single word carried more weight than the entire drive. I set the box down on the desk between us. And I stopped stopping it. Silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the sound of the ocean outside the window. Renata nodded slowly, like she had been expecting this longer than I had. "Good," she said at last. "So what now?" That question should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like the first real question I had been asked all day. What now? Not what do they want? Not what do I owe? Just, what do I choose? I looked at the folder inside the box, the one I had never shown anyone, the one that didn't belong to my family, my obligations, or their expectations. Something I had built quietly, far away from the version of me they believed in. "I start separating everything," I said finally. Renata didn't blink. "Everything?" I nodded. "Accounts, payments, commitments, all of it." She gave a short breath, almost a laugh. "So the wall is coming down." That word hit harder than I expected. Wall. Because that's what I had been. Not a daughter, not a sister, a structure they leaned on without thinking about what would happen if I stepped away. I sat down for the first time that night, and I started going through it. Auto payments, shared bills, quiet transfers, obligations I had labeled as temporary for years that had somehow become permanent without consent. Each one I removed felt less like destruction and more like correction. Like undoing something that should never have been built that way in the first place. By the time I finished, the screen in front of me looked different. Not empty, just honest. Renata watched me close the laptop. "You know they're going to notice," she said. "I know," I replied. "And when they do?" I finally looked up. "Then they'll meet me without the version of me that absorbs everything." Outside, the tide shifted against the shore, steady and indifferent. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding anything together. I felt like I had finally set it down. The next morning didn't feel like collapse. It felt like silence after noise you didn't realize was constant. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't filled with obligations disguised as emergencies. No requests, no urgent fixes, no one asking what I could handle. Just quiet. And that quiet was uncomfortable in a way I didn't expect. Because when you spend long enough being the solution, absence feels like something is broken, even when it's actually just freedom starting to take shape. I kept thinking about my family, not with anger yet, with distance, like watching people in a room you no longer belong inside. By noon, the first crack appeared. My phone lit up. My sister. Of course. I almost didn't answer. But old habits don't disappear just because you decide they should. So I picked up. Her voice came in fast, already irritated. "Where are you?" Not hello, not how are you. Just location. As if I had moved without permission. "I'm working," I said calmly. A pause, then she scoffed. "You're ignoring us now?" That word, us, hit differently than she intended. Because it wasn't us asking for me. It was us expecting me. "I'm not ignoring anyone," I said. "I just stepped away from responsibilities that were never agreed to properly." Another pause. Then her tone shifted. Less confusion, more entitlement. "Mom says you stopped paying for everything." There it was, the real subject, not me, the money. "I stopped covering things I was never asked to permanently carry," I replied. Silence on the line. Then her voice sharpened. "So what happens to my car?" That question again. The same center of gravity in every conversation. I exhaled slowly. That's not my responsibility. She laughed once, like I'd said something absurd. It literally is. You always handle it. That sentence. You always handle it. As if repetition created obligation. As if survival meant consent. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window overlooking the water. No, I said quietly. I always handled it because no one else chose to. Another pause. This one longer. Then her voice dropped slightly, more careful. You're really going to let things fall apart over pride? That word, pride, was their favorite weapon, because it made boundaries sound like ego instead of self-respect. I'm not letting anything fall apart, I said. I just stopped holding it together alone. A distant sound came through the line. My mother in the background, speaking before I could hear her clearly. But I already knew the tone. The narrative was shifting, and not in my favor. My sister came back on the line, sharper now. You've changed. For the first time, I didn't argue it. Yes, I said. A beat. I have. And I hung up. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just finished. I sat back down and stared at the phone for a long time. Because something important had just happened. For the first time, I hadn't tried to fix the discomfort of someone else's expectations. I had let it exist. And nothing collapsed. At least not mine. Outside, the tide kept moving like it always had, without asking permission, without explaining itself, without apologizing for shifting the shoreline. And I realized something I hadn't understood before. They weren't reacting to loss. They were reacting to access being removed. And that was only the beginning. By the third day, the silence from my house back in Millhaven wasn't silence anymore. It was pressure. The kind that builds when people realize the system they depended on is no longer responding. At first, it was small things. Missed calls, repeated calls, voicemails that started controlled and ended strained. Then my mother finally reached me. I didn't pick up immediately. I already knew the tone I would get. Not concern, not understanding. Control dressed up as concern. When I finally answered, her voice came through tight, measured, like she was trying to hold the situation together with phrasing alone. Jolene, she said, we need to talk. No greeting, no warmth, just entry into a problem. I'm listening, I said. A pause. Then she began carefully, like she was building a case instead of having a conversation. Your sister is upset. The car situation has created stress. And your father... Another pause, as if invoking him added weight. Doesn't understand why you've suddenly decided to withdraw. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't withdraw suddenly. Her voice sharpened slightly. You stopped everything suddenly. That word again. Everything. As if my life existed only in what I provided to theirs. I stopped covering financial responsibilities I was never formally asked to carry long-term, I said again, calmly. A sigh on the other end, the kind that suggests disappointment rather than dialogue. We are your family, she said. We don't operate like a business. That line almost made me laugh, because in my experience, that was exactly how we operated. I just had been the only one funding it. I never treated you like a business, I said. I treated you like family. That's the difference. Silence. For the first time, she didn't respond immediately. Then she changed direction. You're hurting your sister. There it was, the pivot. From responsibility to guilt. From facts to emotion. She's an adult, I said. She's struggling, my mother replied quickly. So am I said. That landed differently. A pause stretched too long. Then her tone softened, but only slightly. You've always been strong, Jolene. You don't need this the way she does. That sentence again. Always strong. Never needing. A compliment that functioned like erasure. I didn't ask to be the only stable point in this family, I said quietly. Another pause. Then she shifted again, this time more direct. The house situation is also concerning. My focus sharpened slightly, because this was new ground. What house situation? I asked. A hesitation, a fraction too long. Oh, nothing, she said quickly. Just logistics, bills, paperwork. Things are confusing right now. But her voice had changed, just enough for me to notice, just enough to know there was something she wasn't saying. I'll look into my own records, I said. No need, she replied too fast. We'll handle it. We, again. The invisible committee making decisions on my behalf. I don't need you to handle anything for me, I said firmly. A sharper silence followed. Then she exhaled slowly. You're being difficult, Jolene. That word, difficult, was their replacement for no. I'm being clear, I corrected. Another pause, and then softer, but colder underneath. Just remember, family doesn't turn its back on family. I stared out at the ocean for a moment before responding. I didn't turn my back, I said. I stepped away from being used. The line went dead quiet, and then she ended the call. No goodbye. Just disconnect. I lowered the phone slowly, because now I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't confusion on their side. It wasn't adjustment. It was escalation. And somewhere behind their words, behind the guilt and the pressure and the rehearsed concern, there was something they hadn't told me yet. Something financial. Something tied to my name. Something they hoped I would never ask about. I stood up and walked to my desk, opened the folder I had brought back from Mill Haven, and for the first time, I didn't just look at what I had built outside their house. I started looking for what they might have built using me. That night, I stopped treating it like a family dispute and started treating it like what it was becoming, a system I had unknowingly been funding. I locked my office door, shut off every distraction, and opened my financial records the way I would open a damaged structure, carefully, from the outside in. At first, nothing looked unusual. Normal transfers, normal payments, the kind of steady financial movement that had blended into the background of my life for years. That was the problem. It all looked normal, because I had been the one making it normal. I started with the obvious things, what I had knowingly paid. My father's medical expenses after his heart issues, the property taxes on the Mill Haven house, my sister's car payments, which had started as temporary help and somehow evolved into something that never ended. Each one had a story attached to it. Each one had a reason. Each one had slowly become expected. And expectation, I was realizing, was just obligation without consent. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This wasn't support anymore. This was dependency built over time. And I had been the foundation without ever being given ownership of the structure. Then I noticed something else. A pattern. Not just payments going out, but accounts connected, names overlapping, documents I didn't remember signing clearly enough to justify the level of authority they implied. A small knot formed in my stomach. So I went deeper, past the visible transactions, into the records tied to the house, the Mill Haven property, the one I had been told was just family home management. That's when I saw it. A credit line, opened under the property. My name attached in a way I did not recognize. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. Then I saw the dates, then the signatures. Something cold settled in my chest. Because I knew my own handwriting, and I knew what wasn't mine. This wasn't carelessness. It was construction. Someone had built something in my name, without telling me, without asking me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, letting the reality assemble itself piece by piece. And once it didn't feel like shock anymore. It felt like alignment. Everything suddenly made sense. Why they pushed back when I stopped payments. Why the urgency in my mother's voice had changed. Why the conversations were no longer about help, but about fixing things. Because something underneath it was now exposed, and I was the only one who could cover it. I closed the laptop slowly, then opened it again. Not to look at numbers, but to start building a timeline. Because if they had used my identity to create debt, then this was no longer about family dynamics. It was about fraud. And I didn't panic. I didn't call anyone. I didn't react emotionally. I did what I always did when something was structurally compromised. I mapped it, line by line, payment by payment, decision by decision, until the entire thing became visible. And once it was visible, it became something I could fix or dismantle. I wasn't sure which yet. But for the first time since I walked out of that house with a cardboard box in my hands, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, one thought kept repeating itself. They didn't just depend on me. They had been using me. And they were about to find out what happens when the person holding the structure decides to step away completely. By morning, the weight of what I'd found hadn't faded. It had settled. That's the difference most people don't understand. Shock disappears quickly, but certainty stays. It starts organizing everything around it. I made coffee I didn't finish and sat at my desk before sunrise, going through the timeline again. This time not as a daughter, not as a sister, as someone auditing a structure that had been built using her name. The credit line tied to the Mill Haven property kept pulling my attention back like a loose wire you can't ignore. It wasn't just that it existed, it was how carefully it had been hidden inside normality. Statements rerouted, mail redirected, explanations softened into vague phrases like bank adjustments and temporary arrangements, all the language designed to make someone stop asking questions. And for years, I had stopped asking. Not because I was naive, because I trusted the people using my silence. That realization hit harder than anger. Because betrayal is one thing, but organized betrayal requires time, planning, comfort with repetition. I closed the file and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. There was a version of me, not long ago, that would have tried to explain this away. Miscommunication, stress, family pressure, anything except the truth forming in front of me. But that version of me had already been packed into a box. I picked up my phone, not to call them, to check something else. The house deed records, the Mill Haven property. What I found made the air in the room feel heavier. The structure of ownership wasn't as simple as I had believed. There were modifications, financial attachments, lines I had never agreed to in principle, let alone in signature. My name appeared in places it shouldn't have been used, and not just once, repeatedly, carefully, like someone had learned exactly how far they could stretch my identity without snapping it. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the coast was calm. Too calm for what I was reading inside. Behind me, my phone buzzed. My sister, then my mother, then my father. All within minutes. Like a system waking up at once. I didn't answer, not yet. Because I knew what would happen if I did. The conversation wouldn't be about what was true. It would be about what I should tolerate. And I wasn't ready to hear the same script again. Family handles things together. You're the strong one. You always fix it. Those lines used to sound like identity. Now they sounded like extraction. By mid-morning, Renata came into the office and immediately noticed the shift in me. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I did," I replied. "Just not much." She glanced at my screen, then at me. "You found something." It wasn't a question. I nodded once. "A structure I was never fully shown," I said, "and a liability tied to my name that I didn't agree to." Renata didn't react dramatically. She never did. She just leaned against the desk and crossed her arms. Legal problem or family problem? I let that sit for a moment, because the answer mattered. Then I said, "Both." That earned a slight shift in her expression. "Then you stopped treating it like a conversation," she said. I looked at her. You treat it like exposure. That word stayed in the air longer than I expected. Exposure. Because that's what it was becoming. Not a fight, not a misunderstanding, a system coming into daylight. I turned back to the screen. I need documentation, I said. Everything, she replied. And just like that, the tone shifted from personal to procedural. Emails, records, bank logs, correspondence. Each piece no longer a memory of family obligation, now evidence. By afternoon, I had something I couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't just money moved around behind my back. It was coordinated reliance on my financial identity. And if I stepped fully out of it, the structure didn't just weaken, it collapsed. That thought should have scared me, but it didn't. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. They hadn't built stability. They had built dependency on a person who never consented to be the support beam. And that meant the collapse wasn't cruelty. It was consequence. My phone lit up again. This time, my mother left a voicemail. I didn't play it immediately. I already knew the tone would be somewhere between concern and control. What I didn't know yet was how quickly the situation at home was starting to shift without me, and how soon they would stop asking and start demanding. The first real crack in their calm didn't come from me. It came from the bank. I found out the same way most things in that family surfaced, indirectly, through someone who still thought honesty mattered. A message from Dell came through mid-afternoon, short, uneasy. You should probably call me. That was it. No context, no warmth, just urgency pretending to be casual. I stepped outside before calling him back. The wind off the water was sharp, cutting through the noise in my head. When he answered, he didn't waste time. They got letters, he said. Who got letters? I asked, though I already knew. There was a pause. Mom, Dad, Brittany. Another pause, heavier this time. About the line. That word again. Line. Like it was just a financial detail, and not a buried structure under everything I'd been unknowingly standing on. What kind of letters? I asked. Dell lowered his voice. Default notices, review notices, something about discrepancies in authorization. I closed my eyes for a second. So it had started. Not collapse yet, but movement. The kind of movement that begins underneath before anyone sees the surface shift. They're saying it's being investigated, Dell added. And, Jolene, he stopped. I waited. They're saying your name is tied to it. Of course it was. It always came back to me. Even when I wasn't the one who built it. Even when I wasn't the one who signed. I know, I said quietly. Dell exhaled sharply. Your mom is losing it. Like actually losing it. She keeps saying you set her up. That made something cold move through my chest. Not surprise, confirmation. Because I knew that reaction. When control breaks, blame fills the space. She didn't ask what actually happened? I asked. Another pause. She doesn't believe there's anything to ask, he said. In her mind, this started with you stepping away. I leaned against the railing. That was the logic I had lived under my entire life. As long as I was absorbing, everything was fine. The moment I stopped, I became the problem. What about Brittany? I asked. Dell gave a short laugh without humor, still focused on the car. Even now, even with everything shifting under them, still the same center, self before structure. I ended the call shortly after, but the weight of it stayed. The house wasn't just reacting anymore. It was destabilizing, and I could feel the pressure building in real time through every message I wasn't answering. My phone lit up again almost immediately. My mother. This time I answered. Her voice came through tight, strained, already halfway between panic and accusation. What did you do? No greeting. No softness. Just blame looking for a target. I didn't do anything, I said evenly. You filed something, she snapped. The bank is asking questions. They're talking about fraud. There it was. The word she couldn't sit with. Fraud. I didn't file fraud, I said. I reported what was done in my name. Silence. Then her voice changed. Lower now. Sharper. You're trying to destroy this family. That sentence landed exactly where I expected it to. Not because it was true, but because it was her only remaining framework. If she admitted error, she lost control. If she admitted truth, she lost position. So she chose collapse over responsibility. I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm separating myself from it. Another pause. Then she shifted again, back into something almost pleading, almost rehearsed. We can fix this. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Withdraw whatever you filed. That part hit differently, not emotional, strategic, because she wasn't denying what happened. She was asking me to cover it again, even now, even after everything. No, I said simply. A breath on the other end. Jolene, I'm not reversing it, I cut in, still calm. I'm not taking responsibility for something I didn't authorize. That's when her tone broke. Not fully, but enough. You always do this, she said. You always turn everything into a stance. A stance. Like boundaries were just opinions. Like refusal was aggression. I turned nothing into anything, I said. I stopped being used as a financial fallback without consent. That silence lasted longer. When she spoke again, it wasn't controlled anymore. It was raw in the way panic makes people lose structure. You don't understand what you've done, she said. We could lose everything. And for the first time, I heard it clearly. Not concern for me, not even anger. Fear of exposure, fear of consequence, fear of losing the system that had always adjusted around me. I understand perfectly, I said quietly. That's why I stopped. Then I ended the call. No argument, no closure, just silence again. But this time, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like distance widening. Behind me, the ocean kept moving like nothing had changed. But I knew better now. Something had already shifted, and it wasn't stopping. After the call, I didn't move for a while. Not because I was unsure, because I was watching the point where denial turns into escalation. My mother's voice still sat in my head, not the words but the structure underneath them. You're destroying this family. That sentence wasn't about truth. It was about control. If I was the cause of destruction, then I could be pressured into reversing it. If I was the problem, then I could be fixed. That's how it always worked. And I had always played my role in that system. Until now. My phone didn't stop buzzing for the next hour. Missed calls stacked up, voicemails followed, then texts. First my sister, then my father, then even messages I didn't expect. Relatives I barely heard from suddenly asking vague questions like something had already spread beyond the house. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't just a family conversation anymore. It had leaked outward. And leaks in families don't stay quiet for long. Renata came in just after sunset, holding 2 coffees and looking at my screen without asking permission. Your phone's been vibrating like it's trying to escape, she said. It's reacting, I replied. She set the coffee down. To what? I hesitated. To the structure losing stability. She studied me for a moment. Or to people realizing they've been leaning on something that moved. That landed cleaner than anything I had said all day, because that was exactly what it was. For years I had been the constant, not just financially, but emotionally, logistically, structurally. The person who absorbed problems so others didn't have to face them. And now that I had stepped away, the system didn't know how to distribute the weight. It only knew how to push it back onto me. My phone lit up again. This time, a message from my father. Just one line. We need to talk before this goes further. No accusation, no emotion. but something worse. Acknowledgement. Because my father didn't engage unless something had already reached a point he couldn't ignore. I stared at the message for a long time, then replied, "There's nothing to discuss that hasn't already been documented." Renata raised an eyebrow when she saw that. "You're going full boundary mode," she said. I gave a small exhale. "I'm going full clarity mode." She didn't argue. Instead, she leaned back against the desk. "You know what happens next, right?" I looked at her. "They try to pull you back in emotionally," she said. "Or they try to make you the villain so they can justify what they did." I nodded. "That already started." She watched me carefully. "And you're ready for that?" I didn't answer immediately, because ready wasn't the right word. Prepared was closer. But even that wasn't complete. Because what I was actually feeling wasn't resistance. It was detachment forming in real time. Not anger, not revenge, just separation. "I'm not participating in it anymore," I said finally. That seemed to satisfy her more than anything else I could have said. Later that night, I pulled up the records again. Not because I was searching for confirmation anymore, but because I needed precision. If this was going where I thought it was going, everything had to be documented cleanly, not emotionally, structurally. I traced the credit line again, the property records, the financial ties, the timeline of dependency layered over years of temporary help. And something became undeniable. This wasn't just misuse. It was sustained reliance built around my absence of objection, which meant when I objected, the structure didn't adjust. It resisted. My phone rang again. My mother. I didn't answer this time. It rang twice more, then stopped. A minute later, a text came through. "If you don't fix this, you're choosing sides." I stared at it for a moment, because that was the framing she always returned to, as if reality itself was a conflict between equal positions, as if accountability was betrayal. I typed slowly, "I'm not choosing sides, I'm choosing accuracy," and sent it. Then I turned the phone face down. Outside, the tide was higher than it had been earlier, closer to the edge, not violent, just persistent. And I realized something simple, but final. They didn't want resolution. They wanted restoration of access. And I had already removed the key. The next morning felt different in a way I couldn't ignore. Not quieter, just heavier. Like the space between me and them had finally stopped being theoretical and started becoming real. My phone stayed silent for almost 2 hours. That silence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the calm before impact. Renata noticed it immediately when she came in. "No calls?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. She nodded once, like she already knew that meant something was building. "Then they're not talking to you," she said. "They're talking about you." That was the difference, and she was right. Because by late morning, Dell called again. This time, he didn't start with warning. He started with urgency. "You need to know what's happening at the house," he said. My stomach tightened slightly. "What now?" A pause. Then, "They brought in someone." I straightened. "Someone for what?" "Legal consultation," he said. "Bank-related. Fraud review. I don't know the details, but your mom had someone at the house this morning going through paperwork." That confirmed it. It was no longer internal panic. It was external response. "They're trying to build a defense," I said quietly. "Or a story," Dell replied. That word mattered more. Because defense assumes truth, story assumes control. "What are they saying about me?" I asked. Another pause. "That you misrepresented things. That you set this up to, I don't know, punish them." A short, humorless laugh escaped me. Even now, everything had to become intention, not consequence. "Of course they are," I said. Dell lowered his voice. "Jolene, your mom is telling people you've been planning this for a long time." That made me pause. because it wasn't entirely wrong, just not in the way she meant. I had been planning separation, not sabotage, but in her framing, those were the same thing. Anything else? I asked. There was hesitation before he answered. Brittany's car got flagged. I closed my eyes briefly. There it is, I said. Yeah, Dell replied. Repo warning, final notice. So it had started spreading into visible consequences now. Not just letters, action. And she's blaming you, he added. That didn't surprise me. It never did. Because accountability was always redirected to the nearest stable surface. And for years, that had been me. I thanked him and ended the call. Then sat still for a long moment. Not thinking, just tracking the shift. This wasn't a family reacting anymore. This was a system unraveling under weight redistribution. And systems don't collapse quietly. They push, they resist, they search for something to restore balance. Usually the same thing they've always leaned on. Me. My phone lit up again. My sister. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail anyway. Her voice came through sharper than before. You're really going to let my car get taken over this? Over whatever game you're playing with Mom? Game. That word again. As if structural dependency was entertainment. As if financial collapse was emotional theater. I didn't play it. I listened, then deleted it without replying. Renata watched me from across the desk. You're getting quieter, she said. I'm getting clearer, I corrected. She studied me for a moment. And what does clarity tell you right now? I looked at the window. The ocean was steady, unbothered. The opposite of everything happening inland. That they're trying to push pressure back onto me, I said, before the consequences fully land on them. Renata nodded slowly. And will it work? I didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer wasn't about intention. It was about history. For 18 months of caregiving, for years of payments, for every time I had stepped in before collapse, that pattern had trained them to expect reversal, to expect me to stabilize things after they fractured. But this time, I'm not stepping in, I said finally. Renata gave a slight nod. Then it escalates, she said. I didn't disagree, because I could already feel it. Not emotionally, structurally. The next call would not be informational. It would be confrontational. And it wouldn't be about what had happened. It would be about what I was refusing to undo. That evening my father called. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. His voice was different. Not loud, not emotional. Controlled in a way that meant pressure was being measured carefully. Jolene, he said, this needs to stop. Not hello, not how are you, just stop. I'm not doing anything, I replied. A pause, then, you're making this worse. That phrase again, as if truth had escalation built into it. I'm documenting what exists, I said. Another pause. Then his voice lowered. Your mother is falling apart over this. That part sounded almost like concern, but it wasn't for me. It's not my responsibility to stabilize a situation built on my identity without consent, I said calmly. Silence stretched. Then he said something quieter. We didn't think it would become this. And there it was. Not denial, not defense, just miscalculation. For the first time, I felt something shift. Not in them, in him. Like he was finally seeing the structure he had helped ignore for years. I know, I said. And for a moment neither of us spoke. Because there was nothing left in that space that could be softened anymore. Only consequences moving forward. After the call with my father ended, I didn't feel relief. I felt confirmation. Because something had finally shifted in his voice. Not agreement, not support, but recognition that the ground they were standing on was no longer stable. And recognition is the first stage of panic. Not mine. Theirs. I set the phone down and stared at it for a moment, waiting for the next escalation. It didn't take long. Within an hour, Del called again. His voice was lower this time, more careful. "They're talking about selling the house," he said. That landed differently. Not because it was unexpected, but because it showed how fast the structure was moving toward emergency decisions. "What house?" I asked, even though I already knew. "The Mill Haven one," he said. "Your mom thinks if they liquidate something fast, they can cover the bank issue before it spreads further." I let that sit. Sell the house. The same house that had been used as collateral without my full consent. The same house I had been financially stabilizing for years, now being considered expendable, because the safety net had finally stopped catching them. "They can't sell it cleanly with that line attached," I said quietly. "That's what I told them," Del replied. "They don't want to hear it." Of course they didn't, because hearing it would require accepting that I wasn't the problem anymore. I was just no longer the solution. When I hung up, Renata was watching me from the doorway. "You heard?" she asked. I nodded. "They're trying to liquidate assets," I said. She leaned against the frame. "That's what happens when people realize the safety net has teeth." I almost smiled at that. Almost. But what I felt wasn't satisfaction. It was distance growing wider. Not between me and them emotionally, between the version of reality they were trying to maintain and the one now forming under pressure. My phone buzzed again. This time a message from my mother. I didn't open it immediately. I already knew what it would try to do. When I finally read it, I was right. "We need to fix this before the bank takes everything. Stop pushing whatever narrative you're pushing. Come home and talk like a family." Narrative. That word again. As if documented financial exposure was storytelling. As if identity misuse was interpretation. I set the phone down, then typed a reply. "I am not preventing anything. I am no longer covering it." I paused, then added, "Do not use my name in any further financial decisions." I sent it, and for the first time, I didn't wait for a response, because waiting had always been part of the system. My role was to wait, absorb, respond, stabilize. Not anymore. Renata stepped in fully now. "They're going to try to contact your lenders directly," she said. "I know," I replied. She studied me carefully. "And if they do?" I turned back toward the window. "Then everything becomes official." That was the part she understood immediately. Once institutions are involved, emotion stops mattering. Paperwork takes over. Truth gets formalized, and denial loses its leverage. Later that evening, I received another call from my father. I answered but didn't speak first. He did. "We're meeting tomorrow," he said. Not asking, not suggesting, declaring. My voice stayed steady. "No, we're not." A pause. Then his tone shifted slightly. "Your mother can't handle this alone." That sentence carried more history than he probably intended, because it implied I had always been part of handling it. And that assumption was exactly what was breaking now. "She won't have to," I said. "She just won't have me absorbing it anymore." Silence. Long enough that I could hear him breathing. Then quieter. "You're really done." It wasn't a question. It was realization. And I answered honestly. Yes. No anger. No satisfaction. Just fact. The line stayed open for a moment longer than necessary. Then he spoke again, softer now. "I don't know how to do this without you in it." That was the first truly honest thing he had said. And it didn't change anything, because knowing you depended on something doesn't mean you're entitled to it. "I know," I said quietly. And then I ended the call. Outside, the ocean kept moving the way it always had, steady, indifferent, unaffected by what collapsed near it. And for the first time, I understood something fully. They weren't losing me. They were losing access to me. And they had never learned how to function without it. The next morning, the shift wasn't subtle anymore. It was visible in how quickly things were moving. Calls stopped being conversations and started becoming coordination attempts. Multiple voices, multiple messages, everyone trying to regain control of something that no longer had a single point of leverage. My mother called first, then my sister, then my father again. And for the first time, I didn't feel pulled toward any of them. Not out of anger, out of distance. Renata noticed it immediately. "They've moved from denial to damage control," she said, glancing at my screen. "That's fast," I replied. "It usually is when money stops flowing," she said. That sentence landed cleanly, because it stripped everything down to its simplest truth. Not emotion, not family, flow, and I had stopped the flow. By midday, Dell called again, but this time his voice wasn't just uneasy, it was tense. "They're meeting with someone," he said. My attention sharpened slightly. "Who?" "Bank representative, or lawyer. I'm not sure. It's happening at the house." That changed the structure of things, because now it wasn't just internal reaction, it was external interpretation. "They're trying to reframe the situation," I said. "Or protect themselves," Dell added. Those two things were often the same in moments like this. I stood up and walked to the window. The ocean was bright today, almost deceptively calm. "What are they saying about me now?" I asked. Dell hesitated. "Depends on who you ask," he said. "To Mom, you're retaliating. To Dad, you're out of control. To Brittany, you're just supposed to fix it." A small, humorless breath left me. Same structure, different language, same expectation. Still me as the stabilizer, except I wasn't stabilizing anything anymore. "Anything else?" I asked. There was a longer pause this time. "Yeah," he said. "They're talking about getting ahead of it publicly." That made me still. "Publicly how?" "They think you might go to the bank or authorities," he said carefully. "So they're preparing their version of events." There it was, the shift from private collapse to narrative management. I closed my eyes for a moment. So now it was about story control. Not truth, not responsibility. Story. Renata stepped closer, watching my expression. "They're trying to preempt you," she said. "Yes," I replied quietly, "because that's what people do when they sense exposure coming. They try to define it before it defines them." My phone lit up again. My sister. I finally answered. Her voice came through fast, defensive before I even spoke. "You need to stop this," she said. I didn't respond immediately. I let her continue. "Mom is a mess. Dad isn't sleeping. People are asking questions. This is going too far." Too far. As if distance from misuse was escalation. "I didn't start anything," I said calmly. "You stopped everything," she snapped back. That word again. Stopped. As if refusal was disruption. "I stopped covering financial obligations I didn't agree to," I corrected. A sharp breath on her end. "You always make it sound so cold," she said. "It's not cold," I replied. "It's accurate." Silence. Then her tone shifted slightly. Less anger. More pressure. "What do you want from this?" she asked. That was the first honest question she had asked. I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud changed its weight. "I want separation," I said finally. "From financial entanglement I didn't consent to." Another pause. Then she scoffed. "So this is just about money to you?" That framing again. Reducing structure to emotion. Reducing exposure to resentment. "It's about consent," I said, "which is something this situation never had." Her voice hardened again. "You're really going to ruin everything over this." There it was, the final layer. Ruin. As if accountability was destruction. As if silence was stability. "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm removing myself from it." And I ended the call. No build-up, no argument, just closure. Renata watched me carefully. They're getting desperate, she said. Yes, I replied. And desperation makes people unpredictable. I nodded. I know. Because I had seen enough patterns by now to understand what came next. When narrative control fails, when emotional pressure fails, when financial leverage stops working, people don't pause. They escalate. And I could already feel the next phase forming, not in what they said, but in what they were preparing to do. The escalation didn't come as a phone call. It came as silence that was too organized. For nearly half a day, no one reached out. No calls from my mother. No messages from my sister. Not even Dell. That kind of silence isn't peace. It's coordination. Renata noticed it before I said anything. This is the part where they regroup, she said, watching my screen stay still. I nodded once. They're choosing strategy over reaction now, I replied. And that meant whatever came next wouldn't be emotional. It would be structured. By late afternoon, Dell finally called. His voice was lower than usual, careful in a way that meant he didn't want to be overheard. They're meeting again, he said. With who? I asked. This time it's not just bank people, he replied. There's talk of documentation being reviewed. They brought in someone to go through signatures. That landed differently, because signatures meant identity, and identity meant exposure beyond family narrative. They're trying to contest the fraud claim, I said. Or discredit it, Dell added. I exhaled slowly. Of course they were, because admitting misuse would end the story they were trying to build. But denying it required attacking mine. What are they saying specifically? I asked. Dell hesitated. That you might have misunderstood your own involvement, he said carefully. A quiet laugh left me before I could stop it. Misunderstood my own involvement. As if I had somehow confused what I did and didn't sign. As if identity could be blurred by repetition. I understand exactly what I signed, I said. Another pause. Then Dell lowered his voice further. Jolene, your mom is saying you agreed to help at the time. That made something in my chest tighten, not emotionally but structurally, because that was the pivot. From denial to reinterpretation. If they could redefine consent retroactively, they could blur responsibility. I closed my eyes briefly. She's rewriting history, I said. Yeah, Dell replied quietly. And she sounds convinced. That was the dangerous part. Not intent. Conviction. Because conviction spreads faster than truth. My phone lit up immediately after the call ended. My father. I didn't answer at first. I watched it ring. Once. Twice. Then stopped. A message followed instead. Stop escalating this. We are trying to contain it. Contain. That word again. As if truth was something leaking. I typed back. I am not escalating anything. I am responding to documented financial activity tied to my identity. Sent it. No softness. No emotional cushioning. Just structure. Minutes later, he called again. This time I answered. His voice was strained, not angry, pressed. This is getting out of control, he said. It's already documented, I replied calmly. A pause. Then he said something I hadn't heard from him before. We didn't think it would reach this point. That sentence again. The family's unofficial confession. Not wrongdoing. Miscalculation. Always misunderstanding scale. Not action. Consequences. You didn't think it would be questioned, I corrected quietly. Silence. Long enough that I could hear his breathing tighten. Then he said, if you push this further, it won't just affect us. I stood still, because that wasn't emotional anymore. That was warning. Not direct, but intentional. I kept my voice steady. I'm not pushing anything, I said. The system is responding to what already exists. Another pause, and then quieter. You need to come home. That was the real ask. Return to the role. Return to absorption. Return to stability. I am not coming back into the system as the buffer, I said, a sharp inhale on the other end. That's not what this is, he said quickly. But it was exactly what it was, and he knew it. I'm done being the point where everything gets absorbed, I added. Silence again, this time longer. He didn't argue after that, just ended the call. No resolution, only distance. Renata exhaled slowly when I put the phone down. They're shifting tactics, she said. Yes, I replied. What's next? She asked. I looked toward the window. The light outside was fading now, stretching long over the water, and for the first time, I could see the pattern clearly. They'll try to isolate the narrative, I said. Make it about conflict instead of documentation. Then they'll try emotional pressure again. And if that fails, I paused. Renata finished it for me. They'll try social pressure. I nodded, because that was the only lever left. Not truth, not money, not negotiation, perception. And perception always needs an audience. Somewhere inland, in that house I had left behind, the story was already being rewritten, and I was no longer inside it. The shift to social pressure didn't take long. By the next morning, I could feel it before I even saw it. It wasn't in calls anymore. It was in the way the silence carried intent, curated intent, like something had already been said about me somewhere I wasn't invited to respond. Renata noticed it immediately when she walked in. You've got that look, she said. What look? I asked. The one people get when they've become the subject instead of the participant. She wasn't wrong, because by noon, Del called again, but this time he sounded different, less like an observer, more like someone caught in the middle of a spreading conversation. You're being talked about everywhere, he said. Define everywhere, I replied. A short pause. The house, neighbors, some of Mom's friends, even Aunt Ratha called asking questions. That confirmed it. The narrative had left the private space. Now it was social currency. And what are they saying? I asked. Del exhaled. That you're attacking the family, that you're trying to take the house, that the loan situation is complicated. Complicated. The word people use when they want uncertainty to replace accountability. I leaned back in my chair. So they've moved from denial to storytelling, I said. Yeah, Del replied. And Mom is leading it. Of course she was. Because control, when threatened, doesn't retreat. It performs. My phone lit up again. This time a group message. Relatives, cousins, people I hadn't heard from in months, some in years. The tone wasn't aggressive. It was carefully neutral. Concern disguised as inquiry. Hey, we're hearing some things and just wanted to check if everything is okay. People are confused about the house situation. Your mom is very upset. Call us when you can. Confusion, upset, concern. All words designed to create pressure without responsibility. Renata glanced at the screen. They're building consensus, she said. Or at least the appearance of it, I replied. Because that was the point. Not truth. Alignment. If enough people believe one version, it becomes the only version that matters socially. Even if it's wrong. Even if it's incomplete. My phone buzzed again. My mother. I didn't answer. But she left a voicemail. I listened to it once. Then again. Not because it changed anything, but because I needed to hear the strategy clearly. Her voice was controlled at first, measured, performative. Then it shifted. You're turning people against us, she said. This is not how family handles things. You're humiliating your sister. You're embarrassing your father. After everything we've done for you. That line again. Everything we've done for you. As if history was a ledger only she could balance. Then her tone dropped. Less control, more urgency. Just stop this. Call us. Fix it before it spreads further. Fix it. Not resolve it. Not clarify it. Fix it. Like damage control was my responsibility. I set the phone down. Renata was watching me closely. "They're trying to force you into a defensive position," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Are you going to respond?" I looked at the screen for a moment, then shook my head. No. Because responding meant entering their frame, and their frame was built to absorb me again. Instead, I opened my laptop and started compiling everything. Not selectively, not emotionally, comprehensively. Bank records, emails, transaction timelines, communication logs, patterns of dependency layered over years of temporary support. Renata raised an eyebrow. "You're building something," she said. "A record," I replied. "For who?" I paused. "Not for them," I said. "For when this stops being interpreted and starts being reviewed." She understood immediately. "This is going legal," she said. "It already is," I replied. "Just not publicly yet." Because what I was seeing now wasn't just pressure. It was preemptive narrative shaping. They weren't trying to convince me anymore. They were trying to convince everyone else. And that meant they were preparing for a moment where my silence wouldn't be enough. They needed me to respond, to react, to slip back into the role where I absorbed and repaired. But I wasn't going back. That evening, Dell called one more time. His voice was lower than before. Careful again. "They're planning something," he said. I didn't ask what, because I already knew the direction. Social pressure always needs an event, a moment, a gathering, a stage. And my mother had never been subtle when it came to audiences. "They're setting up the birthday event," he added, "for Nana." That stopped me for a second, because that changed the center of gravity. Not just family, not just conflict, a gathering, a public space. I exhaled slowly. "Of course they are," I said, because now I could see it clearly. The narrative needed a stage, and the stage had just been chosen. The moment Dell mentioned the birthday, everything in my mind shifted from reaction to structure. Because now it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about audience. And audiences change how people behave. Renata noticed the change in my silence immediately. "You're thinking ahead," she said. "I'm seeing the setup," I replied. That's what it was. Not an event. A staging ground. By morning, the calls started again, but different in tone. Less panic, more coordination. My mother's message came first. "We're doing this for Nana. Don't make this about anything else." As if anything involving me in that family ever wasn't about everything else. Then my sister. "Just show up and don't cause drama, please." And finally my father. "We should handle this privately before the weekend." Privately. That word again. Because privacy had always been their tool for control. Public spaces exposed them. Private spaces contained me. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could control. The documentation. By midday, Dell called again. His voice was quieter than before. "They've booked a venue," he said. I paused. "What venue?" A hesitation. "Coastal place, near the water. Fancy setup. They're trying to make it look intentional." I almost smiled. Intentional. Yes, that part was correct. But not in the way they thought. Because what they were building wasn't just a party. It was a narrative event. A controlled environment where perception could be shaped in real time. "Who's paying for it?" I asked. Another pause. "I don't think Mom is covering all of it," he said carefully. "There's talk of arrangements." Arrangements. That meant leverage, credit, borrowing against something again, and that meant risk layered on top of exposure. I closed my eyes briefly. They were still building on unstable ground, just faster now. Renata leaned against the desk. "You're not going to stop it," she said. "I'm not trying to," I replied. That surprised her slightly. "Then what are you doing?" I looked at her, making sure when it collapses, there's no confusion about why. She studied me for a moment. "That's a very clean way of saying what most people would call revenge." I shook my head once. It's not revenge, I said. It's clarity without interference. She didn't argue, because she understood the difference. Revenge is emotional reaction. Clarity is documentation meeting reality. By evening, I received something unexpected. A message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Short, careful. Hey, just checking in. Your mom seems really stressed about the weekend. People are saying there's a misunderstanding with the house. Wanted to hear your side. There it was. The shift had completed. Side selection. Not facts. Not truth. Sides. I didn't reply. Instead, I added the message to the folder. Every conversation now had a purpose. Not to resolve. To record. That night, Renata came back into the office with a different expression. They've started assigning roles, she said. What do you mean? I asked. Your sister is the victim, she said. Your mother is the organizer. Your father is the mediator. And you, she paused. The problem. I nodded slowly. That's predictable. It's effective, she corrected. And she was right. Because stories don't need truth to spread. They need structure. And they were building theirs carefully, piece by piece, character by character. By the time the weekend arrived, they wouldn't be walking into uncertainty. They would be walking into a script, and they expected me to play my role again. The only thing they hadn't accounted for was that I had already read it and rewritten my part. By the time the weekend arrived, the air around everything felt staged, like the calm before a curtain rise. But this time, I wasn't inside the script. I was standing outside it, watching it get finalized. Renata arrived early that morning with a simple question. You ready for this? I looked at the folder on my desk one last time. Not the weight of it, but the completeness. I've been ready, I said. It wasn't confidence. It was closure that had been delayed long enough to look like preparation. Del called before noon. His voice carried something different now. Not confusion, not tension, acceptance. They're already there, he said. People are arriving. Mom's acting like everything is perfect. Of course she is, I replied, because control always performs first. Reality always follows later. What about Dad? I asked. A pause. He's quiet, Del said. Too quiet. Like he knows something is about to happen, but doesn't know what side he's on yet. That part didn't surprise me. My father never chose early. He observed until choosing became unavoidable. Then I hung up, and I drove. The coast road stretched out in front of me, familiar now in a way that felt different than before. Not escape, not return. Arrival. When I reached the venue, I could already hear it. Voices, laughter, glasses, music too soft to matter. A room full of people believing they understood the story they were inside. My mother saw me first. Her face shifted instantly, composed, practiced, like she was stepping into a role she had rehearsed all her life. There you are, she said brightly. I'm glad you made it. Not relief, not apology, presentation. My sister stood nearby, scanning the room like she was measuring reactions. My father was off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching more than participating. And the guests, the cousins, neighbors, extended family, were already aligned in tone. Warm, comfortable, confident in the version they had been given. I didn't interrupt the flow. Not yet. I moved through it slowly, not as a participant, as someone confirming positions on a map. Renata texted from outside. They're fully in it. I didn't reply, because I could already see it. The structure they had built. My mother as the center, my sister as the concern, my father as the balance, and me, absent from responsibility, but present as explanation. The issue they were all quietly prepared to address if needed. My mother tapped a glass lightly. Before we start, she announced, smiling at the room, I just want to say how important family is, especially when things get complicated. A few nods, a few polite smiles, the script tightening. I let her continue. Because this part always comes before exposure. She looked toward me briefly, a subtle cue, an invitation back into the role. I didn't take it. Instead, I stepped forward, just enough for the room to notice the shift. The sound softened slightly. Not silence yet. Awareness. "I'm glad everyone is here," I said calmly. My mother's smile held. My sister's posture stiffened slightly. My father looked up. I reached into the folder I carried and placed it on the table nearby. Not dramatic, not rushed, just placement. "This is the part," I said, "where the story you were told and the reality you're standing in finally meet each other." A pause moved through the room. Not fear, not understanding, transition. I looked at my mother first. "You told people I was helping," I said. "I wasn't. You told people I agreed to financial arrangements tied to my name. I didn't." Her expression tightened slightly. "Jolene, not now," she said softly. But now was the only time it worked. I continued. "There are signatures here that aren't mine. There are accounts tied to my identity that I didn't authorize. And there are financial obligations that were placed on me without consent." A murmur moved through the guests, not loud, but real. My sister stepped forward slightly. "This is embarrassing," she said quickly. "You're doing this in front of everyone?" I looked at her. "You chose the setting," I said. My father finally spoke, low, controlled. "Is this necessary?" I turned to him. "Yes," I said simply. Because it was. Not emotionally, structurally. My mother's composure started to slip. "This is family business," she said sharply. And that was the mistake. Because that phrase only works when everyone agrees to stay inside it. I didn't. "This stopped being private when my name was used without consent," I said. The room shifted again. People were no longer just guests. They were witnesses. My mother's voice rose slightly. "You're trying to humiliate us." "No," I replied. "I'm making sure there's no confusion later about what actually happened." That was the difference. Emotion seeks reaction. Truth seeks record. My grandmother, seated quietly nearby, lifted her head. She looked at me. Not confused, not surprised, recognizing. And she said, softly enough that only those closest heard, "Let her speak." That was it. The final permission the room didn't realize it had been waiting for. My mother stopped talking. Not because she was finished, because the room was no longer responding to her the same way. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I didn't come here to destroy anything," I said. "I came here because I'm no longer carrying what was never mine." I slid the folder forward slightly. "And from this point forward, everything is documented, reviewed, and handled appropriately." A pause. Then I added quietly, "I'm done being the structure that holds everything together while being told I'm not part of it." No one spoke immediately, because there was nothing left in the script for that moment. Not for my mother, not for my sister, not for my father, just space, and truth occupying it without permission. I stepped back, not as exit, as completion, and for the first time in a long time, nothing followed me home. If this story made you rethink what you've been carrying for other people, don't ignore that feeling. You don't owe anyone unlimited access to your time, money, or peace. Subscribe for more stories about hidden truths, family power shifts, and quiet comebacks that speak louder than arguments. Like this video if you've ever had to choose yourself when no one else would. And comment below. Where are you watching from, and what part hit you the hardest? See you in the next story.